So, a friend asked me to talk about Hotline Miami. She wanted to know my opinion since I played the game and I liked the game a lot. So, I'm gonna give you my opinion on the game before I do any more videos or comments, podcasts, call it whatever you want. So, Hotline Miami is a 2D top-down action game which was released in October 23rd of 2012 for Microsoft Windows and later for everything else, really. It makes a top-down perspective with stealth, which I found incredibly interesting because you can storm in and kill everybody, but that's not the most reasonable approach because it will get you killed, and if you stop for too long you will get killed. The hard thing about doing the game, playing the game, I'm always improvising this video, so I'll do some mistakes despite having a script. I like improvising. The hard thing about playing the game is that you can't be too aggressive, but you can't be too defensive. Because there's this level, I think it's the fourth level of the game, you start having dogs as enemies. So you'll need a door stopped to wait for the enemy to move so you can get in the room and kill everybody in the room. But out of nowhere, this dog storms in and kills you viciously, and there's blood everywhere. The next time you know there's a dog somewhere, but the game is randomly generated, a bit like The Binding of Isaac, so you never are quite sure of what to do. You always have an idea because the layout is always the same, but the enemies have slightly different EIs, so it makes the game more difficult. It's also a very unforgiving game, and it is hard to get used to. No, the controls are easy enough, but hard to get used to the EIs, which they notice you by movement and by sound. If you open a door too soon, you'll get shot. If you're in the view of an enemy, you'll get shot. You can get shot because you shot someone else and you were hurt, and everybody comes storming to shoot you in the head. And it's also a bit hard to get used to visually because it uses a lot of neon colors, like things that we use in the 70s and the 80s, like neon green, neon pink, neon yellow, a lot of strong colors. And the game is very it is very very inspired and based on the 80s, especially on the music. You notice that there are some influences from soundtracks of movies and shows from the time, but also by the neo-noir cream drama Drive. If anyone who has seen Drive knows the story of Hotline Miami, because they're very similar. They're so similar, the director of Drive was credited and thanked in the credits of Hotline Miami. And really, Hotline Miami is pretty much Drive the game, not in a bad way really, because it's like that with Premonition and Twin Peaks. They're clearly inspired by the other, but they're different enough so you can enjoy them without calling them a rip-off. The game itself is divided into chapters. Remember that system from Dragon God in which you had the game divided in chapters and then verses, like a book? It's kinda like that. Though I see Hotline Miami the version more like a show rather than a book like Dragon God. It's like a show that you see these chapters, these episodes of, and they're not always told by order. The story is very surreal and vague, which leads most of the things to interpretation. Some people have said that the story of the game only exists for an excuse for the violence that you inflict on others, but I believe it's a little more than that, because with the second game actually, I'm sorry, the wrong number, you see that the first story of the game is a movie based on the first story of Hotline Miami, the first game, which is very interesting because the movie is apparently being done by one of the characters of the first game who saw the main character and witnessed his deeds and decided to do a movie about it. Only the movie has been twisted and turned into depicting something that it's not quite what happened. You know what happened in Hotline Miami. For more vague that it is, you know what kind of person Jacket was. Jacket is the main character. I'll explain him in a little bit. But you see that the story might have been planned. They just wanted it to be vague enough so they could do the second game and say, well, maybe that's what happened because the story is so surreal. You're pretty much in the head, kind of the Jacket. So you, in the first game, you play as an unnamed protagonist, which the fans call Jacket, because he uses this jockey type baseballish jacket, very American, and a t-shirt, jeans, and some shoes. He never shows his face directly in the game. You see him from top, but he never has any dialogue. He's another silent protagonist. And he always has a mask of an animal to hide his face, and these masks give him powers, like the tiger mask. It gives him fists of fury, if I recall correctly, which make his fists one hit kill. Something like among those lines. I don't remember correctly because I played this game I finished the game a while ago, and I replayed some of the chapters to do this review, but not all of them. I usually don't use that mask, but it's the one I remember the most because of the reference it makes. The reference of the masks are quite funny, actually. They have this wall one called Rasmus, which I find amazingly amusing because when I was a teenager there was a band that went by that name. That's so funny, but I digress. And the game and the chapters always sound in the same way. Now, a protagonist wakes up. He listens to a cryptic message left on his answer machine about some mundane job he must do, which is actually an assassination job because he's an assassin by hire. And the player, upon arriving, will be asked to choose a mask that will hide Jacket's face. And most of the times, you must kill everybody. Just kill everybody. Sometimes you'll have a boss, and the bosses aren't easy, and there are very few other characters. The most interesting ones are the whore, which you save on the 3rd chapter. And she's amazingly interesting by the way she treats Jacket like he's going to kill her too, and he just saves her and keeps her in his apartment. And it is implied that they were romantically involved. In the second game, however, when the movie is made, and this has caused a lot of controversy in the gaming community, especially with feminists, that the protagonist of the movie rapes a blonde character who probably is the prostitute from the first game, which is amazingly interesting because It is implied that Jacket was amazingly sweet and caring for her, which drives him on the second half of his story. And how to say this? The game is very surreal. The other three characters are characters that are either different parts of Jacket, or they represent different people from Jacket's life, including himself. The guy who wears the Richard mask is dressed exactly like him, so you can replicate that look in the game. And they can also just be nothing, dreams. Just they give you cryptic messages about Jacket not knowing who he is and not knowing what he's doing. And I find that amazingly interesting, being the most interesting thing about the game. It's so vague that you can just say it's about almost anything. I usually like to go for the easier route and see those things as both incarnations of Jacket's personality, being detached from life, but not enough not to have a Nintendo DS and going always to the same store and feeling guilty for killing someone who hasn't a part in the things he's doing, and saving a whore who he could have very well killed, and eventually doing what he does in the second part. I don't want to spoil it because I found it one of the most impressive and powerful moments in the game. And they're representations of people who Jacket knows. There is one who's Rasmus, wears the Rasmus mask, who represents the Russian mafia. There is one with Don Juan's mask, which is a horse, and it is a woman. And the most accepted theory is that she represents the whore. And there's Richard, who represents Jacket himself. They represent his guilt, his personality, and his detachment, I think. The Russian mafia represents his detachment from his victims that he can kill. And he himself represents, well, what he used to be, who he was. And Richard tells him that he isn't innocent and he's doing wrong, and gives him those kinds of cryptic messages that we aren't sure what he's saying, but he's saying what we might think he's saying, or not. And then you have Don Juan, which is, the name is interesting because Don Juan is a very popular fictional character, especially here in South Europe, because Don Juan, it's an equivalent of Casanova. It's a man who seduces a lot of women, and it is represented by a woman, and probably by the whore, which means she probably slept around a lot, or maybe she was with the wrong people and she's not really a whore. We never get a very clear answer for that, as long as I remember. And it's a very surreal thing. You aren't very sure of what you do. But again, the best part of the game, it's really the gameplay. I'm usually not a big fan of gameplay. Well, I need good gameplay like everybody else, but I prefer a good story. And Hotline Miami, it's a challenging game who requires planning and patience to do, and the game grades you, and the points you get allow you to unlock new weapons, and new masks will give you new powers. The game also contains a slightly different interpretation of the game, where we play as the biker, who's another assassin for hire who gets the same message as Jacket. He's also boss in Jacket's game, which in Biker's game you play against Jacket, and in each game they kill each other. So the canon one apparently is that Biker was killed, Or maybe Biker is the jacket, and that fight was a fight against himself. Who knows? Nobody knows. I don't know if the creators know. They probably know and won't tell us because they want us to keep the mystery, because it's more fun like that. And Hotline Miami uses an unreliable narrator, which is a narrator who has seriously been compromised and cannot be fully believed due to things like exaggeration, bugging, mental problems such as traumas, dissociation personality, or self-alienation, a narrator who doesn't take the narration seriously, a naive narrator, or a narrator that lies. And like I said, the events are told in chronological story with order, which makes the game the whole more interesting. So, is Hotline Miami really worth playing? Yeah, it is. I know I've written for a group on Facebook that no violence has justification anywhere, and really it doesn't. But I'm not saying that violence in Hotline Miami is justifiable, but the way the violence is used and the way it is put in the game and the way the character reacts to it, it's a very good way to approach it. It's a different way to approach it from, let's say, No More Heroes, which also has is a satire of violence in video games. And I think it was a very good thing to play for me because it made me think about how a story can be told with little to no words and just make you think, who's this guy and who am I playing with? And it's also a very fun game. It's a good game to play when you're angry and something real bad or happened and it made you really angry, and you go play that game. You killed some people who you know are bad because they're part of the mafia, and the mafia is so bad and everybody knows them. The mafia are criminals, stereotyping for the win. And you kill all those horrible people and you feel good, especially when you save a woman at the end. I mean, she was really bad, in a real bad shape, and it's a nice game. Biker is a little bit more psychotic, but he basically, Biker's story is that he's fed up with working for the mafia and he goes and destroys the mafia, which isn't far from what Jacket does at the end. That's why I have the theory that they're part of the same person. They're at least a representation of the same ideal. So, yeah, the game is worth playing. Go play it. Go play it and then come back and talk to me about it. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think is going on in the game. It's a very interesting experience. So, next time I'm gonna do some just suggestions, musics and gaming and shows and movie suggestions. I'll try to do once a week for those, and I'm going to do 2 top 5s, the top 5 of my favorite JoJo's stands, which was requested, and top 5 of my favorite male characters overall. I also thought about doing a female character one, but I sadly don't like that many female characters as males. Well, I'm a female. That happens. And then I'm gonna review Bacano finally, because I was on vacation, so I didn't have much time, and then I got sick, and well, shit happened. So I'll see you next time with those videos.